Welcome back to the Group Practice Accelerator podcast, brought to you by Polaris Healthcare Partners, where we leverage decades of healthcare and business experience to drive growth in successful group practices just like yours. If you're a healthcare entrepreneur and you're interested in building, scaling, or exiting your group practice, you've found not only the industry's leading resource for business education, but a team of trusted advisors dedicated to helping you achieve and exceed your goals. In short, the team at Polaris creates clarity, confidence, and results. I'm your host, Jamie Falash, and the Group Practice Accelerator podcast is on the air. Hey everyone, thanks for joining me again today because we're sharing tips on cutting the fat. Wait a minute, are we talking about diet and health tips? No, of course not, because we're all about accelerating the growth of your business. So what we are talking about is tightening your belt from an operational perspective, meaning how can we step back and look at places where maybe we're spending a bit too much? Maybe we need to look at our vendors, our systems, and what have you. The list can be extensive when it comes to ops. And given the roller coaster ride that's our economy at the moment, maybe now is a good time for a review and some fine tuning. Now, I like to lean on my resident experts for this kind of information, and here with me to break it down into categories where you can look to save some money is my teammate and Fractional COO executive, Adin Bradley. Adin, welcome back to the show.
Thanks, Jamie. Great to be here with you.
Good to see you. So today we want to call out some of the aspects of operations where businesses can save some money. And most of our audience knows, maybe I'll just mention it for a few of you that might be new here. Adin's got decades of experience in multi-site practice. So he knows operations front to back. He can see issues probably before you're aware of them. So he's a great sounding board. He's a wealth of information on this type of thing. And we know that historically, operationally strong businesses survive economic turbulence. So first of all, step one, keep calm. Secondly, we're going to follow Adin's advice. So with that, Adin, how would you break this down into some categories, or do you have some opening words? And then I'm going to ask you about some specific categories where maybe spend could be fine-tuned a little bit.
I think this podcast, Jamie, is perfectly timed because I think it goes without saying, right now we're in a time of a little bit of economic uncertainty. Consumer confidence is being measured a little more closely. And this is a really great time for our listeners to level set their operations, not only to be prepared in the event of any downturns, but more importantly, to really put in place some processes that are going to be repeatable long after this episode occurs and long after any sort of potential downturns happen. So I think this is a great time for this conversation.
Absolutely. And I was almost waiting for you to bring up the proactive versus reactive client, because we cannot have an episode without talking about it. And truly, if you're reacting to every little wave in the economy, and not to say that anything's been a blip on the radar recently, I'm not trying to diminish that. But if you are prepared and fine-tuned and operationally sound to begin with, there's no need to panic. There's no need to do any of this. This should all be built into your strategic plan with opportunities to reevaluate throughout the year, right?
You are 100% right. And I would take that, one step further. Over the last probably 2 weeks, I've had more calls than normal with potential clients or current clients and even past clients, just sort of asking for, our input. And the first thing I say is, as the captain of the ship, the principals and the owners, and especially the senior leadership team, needs to remain calm. The reason for that is to ensure that the team just continues focusing on our patient flow and being the best at what they do and leaving the headaches to everybody else. If we see the principals or senior leaders acting skittish, for a lack of better word, we may create some undue concern or even panic. I think people covet their jobs and we covet them. So we want to make sure that they feel good about where they are. And most importantly, they're really just focusing on what's important, which is our patients.
That's absolutely true. And that reminds me, I listened to a webinar the other day put on by the Dental Trade Alliance from a company called Fluent, and they bring a lot of patient and purchasing data. And the reason I want to point that out is because according to their recent data, we have not seen a dip in patient flow. Yes, it's been a little flat. We'll concede to that, but we haven't seen a dip in that. So again, keep calm. We can definitely get through this, and whether the economy is up or down, fine tuning is a necessary aspect of being operationally sound. So with that, why don't we first talk about supply spend? We know that this is a big category that you see red flags in all of the time. So why don't we talk about like vendor relations and contracts, and maybe even some e-procurement. I know we work directly with Method here, so we're an advocate of what they can do for practices as well to help save some money. But I'll stop talking and let you start with supply spend.
Yeah, I think this is one of the areas that somewhat gets overlooked. And when we look at margin, our profit margin and our net income, we often look for big ticket items that have these great big savings and make one large impact. And we've done a podcast in the past called Train Wrecks and Silver Bullets. And this is what I would call one of those areas that's not necessarily a silver bullet, but it is one of three or four areas of attention that can help generate 1 or 2% increase in margin. And as you call out, the spend on supplies, whether it be dental supplies and lab supplies, I think that's an area that now is a time to get a little bit tighter. You mentioned Method that works with all different suppliers looking for best price. I think adhering to very strict budgets. So if you have a monthly forecast for the month, a monthly budget set, I would try to plan on a spend of maybe 4% with a little bit of cushion in there. It gets people more diligent in their spending. I would recommend maybe running a little bit of that inventory down a little bit further than we normally would. We have found at times we continue to make standard supply orders, and then when we look on the shelf, we've got far more than we need, and we create this sort of imbalanced level of spend. So I think, ensuring that we're rotating stock, making sure nothing expires, and getting more to not a just-in-time method, but as close to just-in-time as possible to kind of drive that particular expense category down to a reasonable spend of 4 and generally not more than 5% of collections. And that comes from what you had mentioned, using different platforms like Method, having someone in charge of the spend, watching the dollars, spending to the budget, and not going over that.
Yeah, absolutely. And then one other aspect is maybe having too many vendors. Are you working with 50 different vendors when you could really be cutting that down and getting all the products that you want? The aim here is not to take away the autonomy of that decision. So it's just to fine tune it and get better pricing wherever possible.
Agreed. Agreed.
And then talking about recalibrating, everybody's got an org chart, right people in the right seats. And I know that that is part of your aim as a fractional COO. Can you talk a little bit about staffing spend? I know maybe that's a little bit more of a touchy subject, but help us out there.
This has been one of the most popular or unpopular conversations that we've been having lately. And some have asked, should we start getting prepared for any sort of downturn? And my answer is you should always be prepared and always be right-sized. But I think right now, there's definitely a heavy emphasis on the schedule. We can be creative in potentially looking at duplication of services. I'm not a big fan of layoffs. However, if there's a vacancy, we need to ask ourselves, does it really need to be filled right now? If there's holes in the schedule, how do we have some clients that are really good at moving they're like I refer to them as air traffic controllers, right? They're continually moving the schedule around and trying to build those scheduling blocks right on top of one another. And then asking if we've got some folks that maybe want to leave early. It's a great way to cut down on overtime. So you can get more efficient without, going nuclear on the plan. And I think coming out of that is business starts to pick up and patient flow starts to pick up because we've developed these really good habits now when we really needed to. They're more ingrained in the team going forward, so that when businesses that might see a downturn rebound, they'll find their margins, their revenue, their net income increasing because they've continued to be efficient in times of good and then not so good.
That makes perfect sense. And rather than layoffs, like you mentioned, very unpopular word and sends anybody into a bit of a panic, rightfully so. Staffing redundancies. Obviously, if you've got those, that's something very different to address. But, how does that, do you see that frequently in practices that you go into where you've got a lot of overlap?
Yeah, we're seeing it now a little bit more than ever because let me tier this a little bit. I think even though patient flow is not necessarily going down, the amount of treatment accepted from the treatment planning is where you might see the hit. And there's two ways of looking at patient flow. One is how many new patients are we getting, and the other is the revenue per patient that we recognize. And especially in fee for service offices. So for our guests out there that are in fee for service offices or multi-specialty GP, we might see a pretty level schedule, if you will, but we may find it more difficult to get case acceptance on higher end treatment. So with that, what we're trying to solve for with a lot of these groups that we're working with is, are we really right sized? What does our FTE count really need to look like? And we need to start looking at every single department, from hygiene to dental assistants to admin to treatment coordination, front desk. And is there areas where we can get some subject matter expertise in there to gain some efficiencies, and then look at right sizing there? Or like I said, if we have a vacancy, maybe we don't necessarily need to fill it. We can distribute work or specialize certain tasks that we don't lose any efficiency and certainly don't lose any quality of patient and patient care and service with fewer people. We're always quick to say somebody left, we need to fill it really quick. We never really look at the landscape to see, are we really structured optimally?
And it's great to have a pipeline, but jumping to refill or backfill that position is not always the answer, as you said.
I've said this a couple times. Turnover is very costly because the cost to attract and onboard any candidate into our organization cost dollars, because there's a level of inefficiency that comes with them until they're trained. But what we forget to do to close that loop is that we generally have someone internally training them. So then they're coming off the job that they're normally doing. So they're not being as efficient as possible. So I think really the focus on retention right now should be the key. And then those that we've onboarded and developed, really make sure we get them up and running very quickly. So this is going to require, really, really good hygiene protocols, dental assistant protocols, treatment planning protocols, sort of, textbook subject matter of how our organization does things, and get them trained properly so then we can get them working with our patients much quicker and not having one or two people off of their regular role training somebody new.
Wow, that makes sense. So let's talk about now what's really essential. You and I have talked about this before, and you've likened it to a personal budget. But to me, if you're truly concerned, what should you be doing? And should you be focusing on motivating the team, reassuring them? Tell us a little bit about what you feel is essential. Just define that a bit for us, if you could.
Yeah. So Obviously keeping everybody in the loop, being transparent is number one. And then, if we do need a little bit of belt tightening, as we kind of compare this to our own personal budget, we look at what are our essentials that we have to pay for in life. And then we have discretionary dollars. If we have less discretionary dollars, we have to make choices. It could be we don't go to our favorite restaurant as much or as many times in a week, or we don't go to the movies, or we don't do whatever things that we enjoy doing when we're not really counting pennies. And I think what that does is help us calibrate on what is really important and then setting a budget to reduce the amount of spend that's a little bit more arbitrary. And I think from there, again, we will build good habits and continue to cycle cash within the business. And we look at a cash balance statement often. And what we try to look at is the cash in the bank going up? Is it remaining the same, or is it going down? And what we're going to try to do is effectively condition ourselves to ensure that the cash on hand is not going down. And it may mean, tightening the belt in some areas of variable and discretionary spend.
That makes sense. But now I'm going to flip the coin a little bit. And we are at Polaris, and we're all about using experts to get the work done right, more efficiently, essentially spend to save. And what does that mean? I mean, just to cut costs by doing it myself approach is pretty inefficient. And I'm not cutting my own hair, nor am I going to provide dental care on myself, even though I'm a hygienist. Just shouldn't happen. We rely on experts. Let's get it done the right way the first time. So, can you talk a little bit more about what that means, spending to save?
Yeah, I think a lot of times we look for, we look at folks that think like, I just need to make across the board cuts. And what we do, and I think what the value of Polaris is helping pressure test some of these decisions. Certainly, there are some areas of belt tightening, and we are definitely going to overuse that word today, I can see. But what I also, what I like to ask them is whenever we think of a position that we may think about cutting or not recruiting or even reducing the spend on, I always look to see, is there a correlating reaction to the revenue side? For example, treatment planning, right? They are heavily responsible for selling treatment, educating patients, driving revenue. Hygiene is the same. Marketing, a lot of times folks want to, scale back on the marketing. I think differently. We should double our efforts on marketing, because the lifeblood of our offices and our group practices is patient flow. And that patient flow comes from a number of sources, internal referrals, employee referrals, our branding, but also a heavy segment of that is from marketing. And I think that when we look at any decision that we're going to make, while they look like positions on an Excel sheet, all of them represent a valuable position within the organization that could have a negative impact on revenue that's greater than the savings that you thought you were going to get.
Right.
And I could give dozens of examples and anyone that wants to reach out, wants to talk about this individually. Over my years, I can tell you that, I've seen cuts being made that actually resulted in lesser revenue compared to the cost savings, and had a negative effect. And it sounds counterintuitive, but many of these positions are set to, drive value of the organization, drive sales, if you will. And I would be really methodical in how I looked at those. So, I love the term spend to save. I'd almost say spend to ensure revenue stream, right?
Right.
So I think that I think very targeted areas of cost containment need to be pressure tested often.
Yeah, that's a very good point, a very good way to put it. And that is why we invite other partners on this show. We want our audience to have access to the finer points and the advantages of spending a little to fine tune in other areas later on. Like we talked about method earlier. We've talked about done desk and all of these things that can play into the amount of money that you're spending. Use the experts. Use Polaris. Use Aiden Bradley to come in and walk you through where you're making mistakes. Because 9 times out of 10, or maybe more than that, it's your experience I'm talking about here, there are mistakes being made. There's always room for improvement, and you should always be evaluating that.
Yeah, I think, first and foremost, our whether it be consulting, associate equity, clinical coaching, fractional COO, all of our information is derived from our proprietary financial modeling. And whether things are going great or they're going okay, we talk about the proactive reactive. We get extremely granular in how the group is functioning from a consolidated basis and how they're functioning from a individual basis, each office themselves. And this helps us drive value there by helping the owners understand where their dollars are spent and what the economic and financial impact is from certain improvements. That could be, as we talked about, chair utilization. As I thought about our call today, I thought about two areas that I've seen a little bit of slippage in when we talk about some specialty practices. One is, now is a time to really ensure, if you're a specialty practice that's heavily dependent on referral sources, keep those referral sources very close. Make sure that relationship is sound, that you are driving value because they are referring one of their patients to us. We've got to make sure that we are an extension of that practice so they feel very confident continuing to send us their patients. And then we send them back and they say, we had a great experience. The other one that I talked about earlier is really important, is a focus on effective treatment planning. I can't state it enough. And I do want to sort of offer an opportunity here for our listeners to read a book that I may have mentioned before that Polaris promotes heavily, called The Challenger Sale. Without getting too deep in it, it talks about the psychology of selling and bringing value to our patients that may have a particular bias or a thought in their mind already, and we're trying to educate them. The Challenger Sale has been a very impactful book for a lot of our clients, and especially in treatment planning, and the docs and the assistants that are trying to educate patients on how to really drive through the noise and get them to understand that what they think is the problem may not be, and how we can solve that. So I think, as we relate that to treatment planning, it really helps with the dialogue, it helps with the education piece, and more importantly, it helps with the trust that the patient has in us, that we're truly the experts, right? You said earlier, I don't cut my hair. You don't cut your hair because you probably feel like it would not look as good as it would if you have gone to a hairstylist. Now, for our listeners out there, I will say Jamie has beautiful hair. So I would not want to cut that hair myself. And I think that as we get cheeky about that and kind of make light of it, no one would really even think about doing that, right? Unless it was something really easy to do. So, if we extend that to what we do here at Polaris, if people are not experts in financial modeling, in expense control, in revenue generation, in driving value, enterprise value, retention of employees, driving culture, all of the areas of focus that we work on, helping driving principles to run their practices more efficiently, would be sort of the same methodology, as use the expert to do that. Because if you're doing it yourself with either preconceived notions or no yardstick, there's really no way to tell if you're performing better. Or even if you think you are performing a little better, are you really performing at maximum efficiency? And will it help you drive growth at the clip that you are hoping to do?
Well, and that's the question you have to ask yourself. Every quarter, every month, whatever your cadence is, am I working at maximum efficiency? Because things tend to snowball over time, and it happens to the best of us. But truly, as you said, fine tune, stay on track, use the experts. And Aiden, I was going to ask you to recap and put a nice bow on that, but you did that for us beautifully. So thank you. And I will second your book recommendation. It's a great series.
All right.
Well, Aiden, always a pleasure having you on the show. And I know our listeners appreciate your hands-on intel, and nothing beats firsthand experience, and you have it. So we appreciate you.
Awesome. Listen, I want to thank you for the time and for all of our listeners that are celebrating a holiday this weekend or doing something fun. I hope that they do. And anytime they have questions, they're feel free to reach out to us. Obviously on PolarisHealthCarePartners.com, you will find all of our bios and contact information there, and always available to set up a Zoom call or a phone conversation. Just kind of walk through what your vision is of success or growth or exit. I enjoy those conversations and welcome anyone to give us a call.
100%. Well, we covered a few ways to fine-tune your expenses, but of course, there's a lot more to consider when really getting your operations running like a well-oiled, cost-effective machine, and Polaris is here to support you. So please give us a call. Aiden can dive into that full picture with you. Also, if you want to take a look at and learn more about any of our Polaris expert advisory services, or maybe there's a topic we haven't covered that you want to hear about, you can send us an email to info@PolarisHealthCarePartners.com, or like Aiden mentioned, you can reach us by visiting our website at PolarisHealthCarePartners.com. Thanks so much for being a loyal listener and subscriber. If you enjoyed today's episode, please leave us a rating on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, or wherever you get your podcasts. We'll see you on the next episode of the Group Practice Accelerator Podcast.